In this video, we're going to explore the new Unreal PCG Biome Generator plugin that was released in 5.4. Now we're going to tie that into our survival series and use it to generate all of the biomes in our world. And so this is sort of part one of that exercise. We'll explore the PCG Biome Generator, kind of highlight the basic mechanics of how you set one up in the world. And then in subsequent videos, we'll expand upon that. So first, as usual, the macro overview. When you do enable the PCG Biome Generator, it has a dependency on the PCG framework. So you would enable the plugin for PCG framework, then you would enable the plugin for PCG Biome Core, and then optionally, but I recommend you go ahead and add the sample project because it has some more assets in there and some more explanations that you can look at. Once you've done that and restarted your editor, this is basically the way the system operates. Starting on the far left, you will generate a texture that will define by color where each biome sits on your landscape. And so you can do that in Paint. You can export it using runtime virtual texturing. Basically, any way you want, you will end up creating a mask that is stored as a texture. And the very first node is this PCG graph that will project that texture onto the landscape so that the system knows where you expect certain biomes to be. So it creates that projection. That projection is then fed into the Biome Core PCG graph, which is the main graph of the system. It basically takes the data off of that projected texture onto the landscape and then processes the various settings that you have set up in the system to generate your results. It is constrained by a volume, so you have a volume that you can size in world to cover as much or as little of the landscape as you'd like. I tend to start small for speed and iteration. There are a series of graph filters. They're a bit unclear to me right now. As I've played with them, they're not giving me the results that I want, so I've got to dig in deeper. But it looks like you'll be able to filter points out based on specific sets of parameters that you set. The Biome Core will read any in-world actors, so you can place volumes and splines throughout the world to override your texture and provide a biome sort of within a biome perspective. And then you have these data assets that define each biome. And so for each biome, you will end up with 4 assets. One, the data asset for the texture color. This is the simplest one. It's simply the color on the texture that biome corresponds to. Your data asset Biome Assets, which is the array of all of the assets that you would like spawned into this biome. So your different trees, shrubs, etc. And then your runtime Biome Assets. So after assets are generated, you have both children assets that you can generate inside the graph, and you can do some runtime augmentation of that. So you'll create those 3 data assets. They will get linked together in a biome blueprint, which is basically just an actor container with 3 variables in it that the BioCore reads when it's processing its results. All right, so that's kind of the macro setup. Let's jump into Editor and we'll play around some more. So to start in Editor, we have our basic landscape. It's a world partition landscape, 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. We have added the ocean around the landscape. And so we have our ocean and our landscape here. And as you can see from our outliner, we've added our ultra dynamic sky and weather. And then these are the assets for the biome. We're going to talk about each of those in a moment, but this is kind of how the level sits right now. In our content folder in our climate core, under biomes, we've created a folder for each biome so that our biome specific assets can sit in a folder. And then for each map, we're creating a folder. Now, here's that texture that we referred to in the overview. So these assets I have copied from the plugin. So the actual plugin has lots of assets here. And what I did is basically found the respective ones that I wanted and copied them so I could play with parameters and not upset the plugin. So I have these assets here. I have my, first of all, my texture. This is the texture that I'm going to project on this landscape. It is currently a 2K texture. So I created that in offline mode. You then have your PCG graph that is called project texture. And if you open that, it's basically a child of this biome core project texture. You basically say, I want to use the landscape as my world origin. And this is the texture I want to use. And most importantly, this texture size. If you don't match your landscape size, your texture will tile. And so let me show you what I mean by that. So right now I've got it set that if I go to my volume here, and here's the volume we were talking about. I currently have the volume set to this size, so I'm going to increase this. So that the volume covers the entire landscape. And then in the project texture graph, I'm going to turn on the debug projection. And what that will do is when I regenerate, so we're going to do our first regeneration of the biome. And because we're a large texture, it's going to take a while since we're covering the entire map. But you can already see the red here, the blue here, and the green here. So if I were to basically orient my map this way and pull open my, it's still generating our tasks. This is why you start with a small zone. You'll see that the texture matches red up here, blue down here, green over on the side. If my texture was not the right size, so if it wasn't this 2070 00 by 2070 00, which is the size of the landscape plus 2 zeros, if I were to cut that in half, and again, it'll take a second to regenerate. You can see that that texture now repeats itself 4 times over my landscape. So there's one here, one here, one here, and one here. So you got to make sure that the projection size matches your landscape, or unless you want it tiled like this, then you can tile it like this. But basically the first step in debugging to make sure you got it right is that you are getting the right color projections in the right parts of the world. So I'm going to go ahead and set that back so I don't forget. And then I'm going to set my volume back down to this small little area, which if I go to my volume was 18,432. Before I do that, let me clean up. I find it better to clean before I make any changes, or you can get some orphaned actors out here in the world. There, they're all cleaned up. And then I'll go to the volume, and I will make that 18,432. Right. 18432. Don't ask me why that number, that just seems to work good for me. And now if I generate again, you're going to see I have, let me get zoomed in here. You can see that the texture is being applied within those bounds of the volume. So that's why I picked this area of the map, so I could get all 3 biomes without having to generate the whole map. So with that shrunk down, if we again go back to our biome generator, and if you look at the component that's on this biome generator, you'll see that the first parameter here is this project texture. You also have a blend range, which will blend between the 2 biomes. And then here are the filters that I said I'm struggling with. So the points filter and then the children points filter, we're going to cover in a later video once I understand how those work. The next thing I would do to make sure this is working is, you can see down here, this debug display biome cache. What that will do is convert these points to cubes so that you can see that the projection is being picked up properly and being converted. So if we click this and generate, you'll see that we get these cubes that have been generated on the landscape. And so you end up now, instead of points, you end up with these cubes that represent the overall PCG output. And so I can see here that I've got what I'm looking for from an overall perspective. Once that's good, you can turn that off so it doesn't draw the debugs. And again, if you want, you can now turn off the projection by turning this in the projection file. And like I said, these filters, so we have our main biome core graph, which we copied over from the plugin. This looks like this. I haven't explored it that much. It has the exposed projection and filters graphs here. So we populate those with our 3 graphs. Again, I've copied both the child filter and the main filter from the plugin. And if you look at this array, you'll see some of the things that the filter should be doing, but I've not been able to figure out how to get these things to work effectively. But this is how you would set up the various filters. We'll do that in another video. All 3 of them get put together with the biome core generator map here in this actor. So this is nothing more than an actor. It's a simple actor, and it contains, so I'll go to its parent because I made a child. It's a simple actor. It has no logic in it. It simply has the volume, the component, and probably some variables, probably not. That's it. So all it's doing is collecting those so that you can place it in level. And so in level, you'd have your biome core. And then the next thing to do would be to create these individual actors, which are just collections for each of the biomes. And so those we did in the biome specific folders. So let's go to hardwood forest. As we said in the overview, you're going to create first your data asset for the definition, and you just right click, miscellaneous, data asset, and you're going to go ahead and create the definition template first. Then you can create the asset template, and then you can create the runtime asset template. The definition is quite simple. All it says is that wherever there is blue, I want, and this is just a name and a priority. So that's it for the data, the biome definition template, 3 fields. That just matches each color with the corresponding biome. The more complicated piece is the data asset and the runtime data asset. So if I open the data asset, you'll see I have 4 elements in my array. I have a spawning 0.01% or weighting using the generator shared trees. There are a number of generators that you can use, and you can create your own, which we will be doing in other videos. You could spawn a mesh, and this will create instant static meshes. In my case, I'm spawning actors because we are going to want them to interact with the seasons, and we're going to want to be able to chop them down. Once you generate these points using the shared trees generator, you have an option to generate a child asset class. And so in this case, the child seedlings will generate these small little tufts around the base of the parent. And you also have the option through these various settings to scale it up or down. Like I've shrunk the trees a little bit here. If you're spawning mesh, you can change the material, cast shadows, do other things like that. Here are the filter options, which I can't seem to get to function properly, but we'll explore those in another video. And then if you want to do the runtime, you need to export your points here. So you need to be export points for runtime for this particular one of the array. You do not have to do it for all of them. In fact, I think for most of them, I did export that one as well. So basically you're going to export your points in runtime, and then you just continue to play with these to get the views you want. The runtime setup is identical. You'll see here I have a runtime. This time it's the Bio runtime asset template, and it has a few less options, but basically you're saying here what do we want to generate around it. So the runtime points are here. So you have your standard asset template, your runtime asset template, only valid if you have checked at least one of these to export runtime data. And then you have this setup actor, which simply puts all 3 of those together. And so the setup actor, which you then drag into the world, needs to have a definition. It needs to have at least one entry in this asset folder. Don't get confused and put the asset in the runtime asset. You need to add one to this array. Make sure you add your asset here, and then you can do your runtime asset here. So all this is doing is connecting these 3 data assets together. Again, just like in the other one, this is simply an actor, and all it has is the biome variables. So once you have all of those set up, once you have, don't worry about the spline, once you have your asset, your runtime asset, and your definition, you put those all into your setup, you drag your setup into the world, and that's this setup right here. So this is those 3 assets. With that in the world, the generator will pick that up, and it will generate your assets based on anywhere there's a blue dot. It will consider my setup and then generate the various trees and foliage underneath the trees and bushes based on how I set that up. And then for softwood, I set another one up. So you'll see over here, I have a spline. This is my hardwood spline. And so where this spline sits, I'm using the definition for the hardwood forest. I'm using the asset. In the asset, I am not using any runtime. And importantly, this extends up and down from the spline of 2000. If it's too small, you're not going to get any generation. So you want to make sure that your Z extents are enough to go above the landscape on the various points, and that will generate your hardwood forest here in amongst this this green one. And of course, like any other spline, I can move to a new location and the forest will move with it. So basically that's the setup. You have a couple of assets that define the map, right? What are the PCG graphs you're going to use? What is your texture going to look like? How do you project your texture onto the landscape? And then for each biome, you're going to have at least an asset, a definition, and a setup. In this case, I also have a spline. And then for the trees, what I've done is just created these actors, which were spawning from the template. Those actors inherit from my base tree. My base tree basically checks ultradynamic sky, determines which season it is, and then picks from a leaf material depending on the season. So if I'm in fall, I'll get fall colors. If I'm in winter, I'll get white. And that's how we're doing that within the base actor. I get generated into the world. You'll see that all my trees are white and all my shrubs are white because it is winter. If I push my calendar forward to spring, I end up with spring foliage, and push my calendar forward into autumn, I'll get autumn foliage. All right, so that's it for now. We're going to explore the filters a bit more, try to create our own generators, and see if we can push this forward. Thanks for watching.